A very good evening, students. I, Anamika Bhau, your English teacher, welcome you all to the online English classes. So, students, first of all, I just want to wish you all a very happy Diwali and happy Children's Day. So, our today's topic is also on childhood. That is the topic for today is our poem Childhood from our book Hornbill. So, Childhood by Markus Natten. So, let's go for it. First of all, we will have a little introduction about Markus Natten, the poet. So, Markus Natten is the poet from Norway. He is the Norwegian poet. So, details of his life is very sketchy. So, it is unclear to say that when and where he was born. He wrote this lovely poem Childhood when he turned 12. This poem is actually a translation. One can imagine that how great it would be in his own language. So, this Markus Natten is a Norwegian poet. He has written this poem when he turned 12. So, this is all about the author. Let's go for the poem. First of all, I'll read the poem. Please look at your books. When did my childhood go? Was it the day I ceased to be 11? Was it the time I realized that hell and heaven could not be found in geography and therefore could not be? Was that the day? When did my childhood go? Was it the time I realized that adults were not all they seemed to be? They talked of love and preached of love, but didn't act so lovingly. Was that the day? When did my childhood go? Was it when I found my mind was really mine to use whichever way I choose, producing thoughts that were not those of other people but my own and mine alone? Was that the day? Where did my childhood go? It went to some forgotten place that's hidden in an infant's face. That's all I know. So, this is the poem Childhood. So, while the reading of the poem, you can notice that the first line is being repeated again and again in the poem. So, this thing in which a poem is repeated again and again in the poem, this is actually a poetic device which is called refrain. So the main poetic device in the poem used is refrain. The refrain, and refrain is repetition of any line, one or two lines again and again in the poem, that is called as refrain. So the major poetic device being used here in this poem Childhood is the refrain. And also, this first line, when did my childhood go, contains the central theme of the poem. That in this poem, the poet is just wondering and regretting at the loss of childhood, and he is asking the question to himself that when did my childhood go. So in this poem, throughout the poem, the poet is just asking the question to himself that when and where he lost his childhood. So, in this quest of searching the time and place where he lost his childhood, he is saying that somewhere he didn't know that when in the process of growing up, he has lost his childhood and stepped up into the adulthood. So, this is the main theme of the poem, that the poet is regretting at the loss of childhood, and he is also telling us different things, actually the three phenomena by gaining which he lost his childhood and and stepped up into the adulthood. So let's go for it. Let's take the explanation of the poem stanza wise. So the first of all, when did my childhood go? Was it the day I ceased to be 11? Was it the time I realized that hell and heaven could not be found in geography and therefore could not be? Was that the day? So, at the very first of the poem, in the first stanza, the poet is wondering that when he lost his childhood, he muses that perhaps it was the day he realized the concepts of hell and heaven he had been taught of since his youngest years had no standing in the light of the day. So maybe when he realized that there are no concepts, actual concepts like hell or heaven in reality, maybe it was that time when he lost his childhood. And he's also saying that geography books didn't find any location of hell and heaven like place. So the education of the poet made him question his faith and look at the world much more rationally. So the poet realizes that he might have lost this childhood when he developed that rational thinking. Maybe it was that time when he lost his childhood. So the first stanza tells us about that when he developed that rationality, rational thinking. Maybe it was that time when he lost this his childhood. So in every stanza, first line in the first line, he is asking the question to himself, and in the last line, was that the day, he is just giving us the reason. Maybe it was that day when he lost his childhood. So in the first stanza he is saying that when he developed that rationality, maybe it was that time when he lost his childhood. In the second stanza, when did my childhood go? Was it the time I realized that adults were not all they seemed to be? They talked of love and preached of love, but didn't act so lovingly. Was that the day? Again, in the second stanza, he's asking the question to himself that when did my childhood go? In the process of growing up, I didn't notice that when my childhood has gone. So, in the second stanza, the poet recalls the time when he realized that adults around him didn't practice what they preached. They always told the poet to be loving and caring, but they themselves were very argumentative, violent, and discourteous. So their behavior was a far cry from the love they sermonized about and advocated so reverently to the child. So the child lost his faith in the adults around him because always they talked of love, they sermonized about love, they spread lectures about spreading love and adopting a brotherhood, but themselves they do not do so. So actually they just pretend to be so, but actually they are not like that. So their latent hypocrisy became evident to the growing child. Perhaps that broken trust was one of the major steps towards adulthood and losing of childhood. So in the second stanza he's saying that when he became able to know, to understand the hypocrisy of the people, maybe it was that time when he lost his childhood. Again, in the third stanza, he is asking the question to himself, when did my childhood go? And he is also saying that was it when I found my mind was really mine to use whichever way I choose, producing thoughts that were not those of other people but my own and my alone? Was that the day? So in the third stanza, as he grew up, the poet realized that his mind was unique. He can make his own opinions, he could take his own decisions. He gained a sense of individuality, which set him free from the prejudiced opinions of the others around him. Now he is saying that he can take his own decisions, he can do whatever he want to do, he can choose whichever way he want to choose. So his own experiences now has shaped his thoughts, and he realized that this might have been the time when he lost the childhood innocence completely, when he developed that individuality. So the third stanza tells us about the individuality, that maybe it was that time when he developed that individuality, maybe it was that time when he lost his childhood. So in the three stanzas he is asking the question that when did my childhood go, and in each stanza he is giving us uh, actually as the three terminologies, and he's saying that maybe when he developed all these three things, that is individuality, rationality, and hypocrisy of the people, maybe it was that time when he lost his childhood. And in the last stanza he is just shifting his question from when to where. So in the last stanza he's saying that where did my childhood go? It went to some forgotten place that's hidden in an infant's face. That's all I know. So, in the last stanza, the poet changes his question from wondering at what point in time he had lost his childhood. The poet now wonders where it went. So, the last three lines may be interpreted in two ways. That first of all, the poet claims that his childhood is nothing more than a long lost memory. He recalls his infancy and believes that his true childhood resides there in that infant's phase, and that innocence cannot resurface in his lifetime. And second interpretation could be that the poet believes that his childhood has become nothing more than a memory for him, but has become the reality of some other infant. So innocence is a cyclic process where lost from one person, it travels to another, finds residence there. So last three lines can be interpreted in two ways. The poet is saying that maybe I have lost my childhood in my own childhood days, or in some other infant's childhood stage. So, and also he is saying that till date, adults can easily recall and seem to almost relive their childhood through an infant in their lives, or by remembering their own childhood days. So, in the last stanza, he is saying us that he can, in fact, everyone can relive the childhood by remembering his own childhood days, or by seeing the other child's childhood state. So this is all about childhood poem. In the first three stanzas, he is giving us the different things that maybe when he developed that individuality, rationality, and understood the hypocrisy of the people, maybe it was that time when he lost his childhood. And in the last stanza, he is saying that my childhood has gone to some forgotten place, and maybe that's hidden in the childhood of some infant, other infant. So he's saying that it is a cyclic process which is moving from one person to another, finds residence there. So this is all about the poem childhood. And in this poem, the poet is asking the question to himself that when and where his childhood has lost, and also he is giving us the different possibilities. Maybe it was that time when he lost his childhood and stepped up into the adulthood. So this is all about the poem. Now, what is the central theme of the poem? Actually, in this poem, Markus Natten wonders when and where he lost his childhood, and in this quest to find that moment he grew up, Markus Natten highlights the innocence and faith he lost even as he gained rational individuality. And also he is saying that adolescence is usually a confusing time for a child who's unable to immediately come to terms with the physical, hormonal, and psychological changes in his or her personality. He no longer feels like a child, but is not quite ready to call himself an adult either. So this is the theme of the poem. And the main poetic device, as I told you, is the refrain. Major poetic device used here in this poem is the refrain, which is that repeat, that line or lines that repeat at regular intervals throughout the poem. And the refrain often carries the central message of the poem. So in this poem, there are two lines which has been repeated again and again. That is first line, when did my childhood go, and the last line was that the day. And it also contains the central theme of the poem, because throughout the poem, the poet is just asking the question to himself that when and where he lost his childhood. And also he is giving us the reasons also. Maybe it was that possibility that he lost his childhood and stepped up into the adulthood. So the main poetic device used here in this poem is the refrain. Analysis of the poem. Again, analysis of the poem. When we analyze the poem, throughout the poem, we are finding that the poet is just wondering when and where he lost his childhood. And in this quest, Markus Natten highlights the innocence and faith he lost as he gained the rational outlook at the things. And also he is saying that adolescence is a confusing state in which we can't say ourselves a complete child, nor we can say that we are a complete adult. So he no longer feels like a child, but is not quite ready to call himself an adult either. So this is the analysis of the poem. And after this poem, nowadays the main concern is that some children are forced to do the bonded labor. And nowadays we can do something to save their childhood, because childhood is quite a precious stage which nowadays also we always remember our childhood days and wants to relive that childhood. And here in this poem, throughout the poem, the poet is also wondering at the loss of childhood. So childhood is a precious stage, and we must do something to save the childhood stage of somebody else. And it is very important to focus on child's culture and child's educational needs. Childhood frames the future of a person, so we must do something to save their childhood at least. And we can do this to eliminate child labor and protecting their rights. That will bring out an awareness among the people. For this, you can you can make a poster on stop child labor. So students, after this poem, I just suggest you all to make a poster highlighting that importance of saving childhood and stopping the child labor. So make a poster on stop child labor. You can also see the posters in the picture. So students, this is all about the childhood poem. And if you have understood the poem very well, now you can tell me that who is I in the poem. That is, of course, Markus Natten is I in the poem. What is the poet obsessed with? The loss of childhood. And what does heaven and hell stands for? That I will leave on you. That what according to you is hell and heaven? Are these the actual concepts, or these are just the imaginary concept that were put in our minds in our childhood stage? So please attempt these questions. So regarding any doubts, ask me anytime. So thank you so much, students.